Hi everyone, welcome to Unique History Channel. Today we'll be reading The Principles and Aim of the Syrian Social Nationalist Party by Antoine Sade, written in 1947, and these will be the basic principles. The first basic principle: Syria is for the Syrians, and Syrians are a complete nation. When I began to give serious thought of the revival of our nation, and observed the irresponsible political movements rampant in its midst, it became forthwith certain to me that our most urgent problem was the determination of our national identity. Although there was no consensus of opinion concerning this problem, I became convinced that the starting point of every correct national endeavor must be the raising of this fundamental philosophical question: who are we? After extensive research, I arrived at the conclusion: we are Syrians, and we are a distinct national entity. The confused conceptions of our nation implies the statements that we are Lebanese, Palestinians, Syrians, Iraqis, or Arabs have contributed to the breaking up of our national identity and cannot serve as the basis of a genuine national consciousness or of our national revival. Thus, the assertion that the Syrians constitute a complete nation in itself is a fundamental doctrine, which should be put to an end to ambiguity and place the national effort on the basis of clarity, without which no national revival in Syria is possible. The realization of the complete nationhood of the Syrians, the active consciousness of its nationhood, are the two essential prerequisites for the vindication and the principle of national sovereignty. 4. Were the Syrians not a complete nation having the right to sovereignty and the establishment of an independent state, Syria would not be for the Syrians in the full sense, but might be subject to claims of sovereignty by non-Syrian entities pursuing interests conflicting with or likely that conflict with the interests of the Syrian people. This principle is intended to safeguard the unity of the Syrian nation, the integrity of its homeland, and the elimination of any ambiguity from legal perspective. The Syrians are a nation upon whom alone devolves the right to own, dispose of, and make decisions concerning every inch of Syrian territory. The homeland belongs to a nation as a whole, and no one, not even individual Syrian citizens, may dispose of its territory in ways such destroy or endanger the integrity of the country. The integrity is a necessary condition for preserving the unity of the Syrian nation. Every Syrian who wants to see his nation free, sovereign, and advanced should subscribe to this principle deeply in his heart. Those who deny that Syria is for the Syrians, that the Syrians are not a complete nation, are committing a crime that deprives Syrians of their sovereignty and over themselves and their homeland. The Syrian Social Nationalist Party declares them criminals in the name of millions of Syrians yearning for freedom, life, and progress. The second basic principle: the Syrian cause is an integral national cause, completely independent from any other cause. This principle signifies that all legal, political questions that relate to any portion of the Syrian territory or any Syrian group are part of one indivisible cause, distinct from and unmixed with any other eternal matter, which is fulfilled by the conception of unity of Syrian interests and the Syrian will. This principle follows from and completely to the first principle, since Syria is for the Syrians, and Syrians are a complete nation endowed with the right to sovereignty. It follows that this nation's cause, that its life and destiny belongs to her alone, and is independent from any other cause that involves interests other than those of the Syrian people. This principle reserves to the Syrians alone right to expound their own cause, and to be sole representatives, determine their own interests, and shape their own destiny. It renders theirs an all-inclusive and indivisible cause. From the spiritual point of view, this principle entails the will of the Syrian nation, which represents its interests, is a general will. The ideals of the Syrians to seek realize emanate from their own character, temperament, and talents. The Syrian nation cannot tolerate the disintegration of these ideals, or its dissociation from them, or their mingling with other aims in which they may be forfeited. These ideals are freedom, duty, discipline, strength, abounding with truth, good, and beauty in the most sublime forms of the Syrian spirit can rise, which the Syrians must obtain through their own endeavors, since no one else but themselves can be represented or realize those ideals for them. In accordance to this principle, the Syrian Social Nationalist Party declares it does not recognize the right of any non-Syrian person or organization to speak on behalf of Syria and its interests in either internal or international matters. The party does not recognize the right of anybody to make the interests of Syria conjugate to the interests of the other nations. The millions of farmers, workers, artisans, and professionals, the trade industry which comprise the Syrian nation, have a will and interest in life that must remain their own. The Syrian Social Nationalist Party does not recognize the right of any non-Syrian person or organization to thrust its own ideals upon the Syrian nation in substitution for its own. The third basic principle: the Syrian cause is the cause of the Syrian nation and the Syrian homeland. This principle unequivocally defines the Syrian cause and empathizes the indissoluble bond between the nation and its territory. Nations arise in distinct territories that sustain their lives and national character. The concept of unity of the national nation and its homeland, embodied in its principles, enables us to understand the nation as a social reality and frees the concept of nationhood from historical, racial, or religious misconceptions as contrary to the nature of the nation and its vital interests. The interdependence between the nation and its homeland is the only principle whereby the unity of life can be achieved. It is within a national territory that the unity of national life and participation in its activities, interests, and aims are obtained. The national territory is vital for development of the social character of the nation and forms the basis of its life. The fourth basic principle: the Syrian nation is the unity of the Syrian people, which has developed through a long history. This principle defines what constitutes a nation, mentioned in previous articles, and require close examination from an ethnological perspective. The purpose of this principle is to negate the concept of a single ethnic origin in the Syrian nation, and declare reality of the nation as an outcome of the long history of all people who have settled in Syria, inhabited it, interacted with each other, and finally became fused into one people. This process began with the people of the Neolithic Age, who preceded the Canaanites and Chaldeans in settling this land, and continued to the Akkadians, the Canaanites, the Chaldeans, Assyrians, Aramaeans, Amorites, Hittites, and led to the emergence of one people, and thus the principle of the Syrian nationhood is not based on race or blood, but rather the national social unity derived from homogeneous intermixing. Through this principle, the interests and aims and ideals of the Syrian nation are unified, and the national cause is guarded against disharmony, disintegration, strife, and result from primitive loyalties to blood ties. The alleged racial purity of any nation is a groundless myth. It is found in only savage groups, and even there it is rare. All existing nations are composed of ethnic mixtures. The Syrian nation consists of a mixture of Canaanites, Akkadians, Chaldeans, Assyrians, Aramaeans, Hittites, and Matini, as the French nation is a mixture of the Gauls, Ligurians, and Franks, etc. And the Italian nation is a nation of Romans, Latins, and Etruscans, etc., the same being true for every other nation. The Syrian nation denotes this society unfiled in life. Through its mixed origins, this nation has come to constitute a single society living in a distinct territory known historically as Syria, or the Fertile Crescent. The common origins: Canaanites, Chaldeans, Aramaeans, Assyrians, Amorites, Hittites, Matini, and Akkadites, etc., whose existing and mixing are an indisputable historical fact, constitute the historical cultural basis of Syria's unity. Whereas the Syrian Fertile Crescent constitutes the geographical, ethnic, strategic basis of this unity. This ethnic and geographical reality was distorted and lost due to successive historical events, which destroyed documentation and led to subversion of various foreign accounts for authentic facts, and destroyed through the various interpretations of our national history. A large number of historians have confined the definition to Syrian, Byzantine, or late Hellenistic Syria, whose boundaries extended from the Tartus Range and the Euphrates to the Suez, thus excluding the Assyrians and Chaldeans from Syrian history. Other historians have further confined this definition to the region of Sicilia and Palestine, and thus leaving out Palestine. All the historians were foreigners who were unable to grasp the reality of the Syrian nation and its environment and the process of its development. Moreover, most of the Syrian historians who derived their information from foreign sources without adequate criticism have followed their lead. Thus the truth was falsified and our genuine cause was lost. The true history of ancient Syrian states, Akkadian, Chaldean, Assyrian, Hittite, Canaanite, Aramaean, Amorite, indicates the same trend, the political, economic, and social unity of the Syrian Fertile Crescent. This fact should enable us to view the Syrian and Chaldean wars aimed at dominating the whole of Syria in a new light. These were internal wars, a struggle for supremacy among the powerful groups and dynasties within the nation, which was still in its making, and which latter attained its full formation. This principle is not least incompatible with the fact that Syria is one of the nations of the Arab world, or one of the Arab nations, nor is it latter fact variance with the statement that Syria is a complete nation with sovereign rights over its territory, and consequently with a distinct and independent national cause. It is neglect of this principle that is given to religious sects in Syria, disunifying the country into a Muslim-Arab faction, one hand, and a Christian foundation on the other, so that the unity of the nation is thereby destroyed, and its energies dissipated. This principle would redeem Syria from blood bigotries which are apt in neglect of national interests. For those Syrians who believe or feel they are of Aramaic extraction would no longer be driven to fan Aramaic blood loyalties, so that the principle of national socialist unity and the equal of every political and social rights and duties are guaranteed. No ethnic or racial discrimination in Syria is made. Similarly, those Syrians who claim to descend from Phoenician, Canaanite, Arab, or Crusader stock would no longer have allegiance but to their Syrian community. And thus would genuine national consciousness arise. The unity of the Syrian nation arose from the mixing of multiple elements which have formed in the course of history of the Syrian people and the character and traits of the Syrian nation. This principle can be said to imply the Jews are part of the Syrian nation and equal rights and duties to Syrians. Such an interpretation is incompatible with this principle, which excludes the integration in the Syrian nation of elements that maintain exclusive racial loyalties. Such elements are not part of the unified people. There are large settlements of immigrants in Syria, such as the Armenians, the Kurds, and the Syrians, whose assimilation is possible given sufficient time. These elements may dissolve in the nation and lose their specific loyalties. However, there is one large settlement which cannot be respected to consider aside to the principle of Syrian nationalism, and that is the Jewish settlement. It is a dangerous settlement which can never be assimilated because it consists of a people that, although it has mixed with many other peoples, has remained a heterogeneous mixture with strange, stagnant beliefs and aims of its own, essentially incompatible with Syrian rights and sovereignty. It is the duty of the Syrian social nationalists to repulse the immigration of this people with all their might. The fifth basic principle: the Syrian homeland is that geographical environment in which the Syrian nation evolved. It has distinct natural boundaries and extends from the Tartus Range in the northwest, the Zargus Mountains in the northeast, and to the Suez Canal and the Red Sea in the south, and includes the Sinai Peninsula, the Gulf of Aqaba, from Syrian Sea in the west, including the island of Cyprus, to the arch of the Arabian Desert and the Persian Gulf in the east. This region is also known as the Syrian Fertile Crescent. These are the natural boundaries of the Syrian homeland, which has housed the elements of the Syrian nation and provided them with the basis for their lives and the opportunity of contact and collusion, the mixture and fusion, which resulted in the formation of the distinct character of the Syrian nation. The Chaldeans and Assyrians were alive in the internal unity and activity of this country and sought to unify it politically, interested as they were in the idea of a territorial state. Similarly, all the other people who inhabited this region were conscious of the internal unity of the country and sought to build up confederations between decentralized governments to avoid internal dissension and for the protection from external incursions. The secret of Syria's persistence as a distinct nation, despite the numerous invasions which it succumbed, lies in the geographical unity of its homeland. It was this geographical unity that ensued the political unity of this country, even in ancient times, when it still divided among the Canaanites, Aramaeans, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Assyrians, and the Chaldeans. A political unity that manifests itself in the formation of allies and the face threats from Egyptians and other invasions. That unity reached its culmination with the formation of the secluded Syrian state which grew into a powerful empire, dominated Asia Minor, and extended as far as India. Syria's loss of sovereignty because of major foreign invasions resulted in partition in arbitrary political units. In the Byzantine-Persian period, the Byzantines extended their rule over western Syria and applied the name Syria to that part, while the Persians dominated the eastern part, which they called Ara, later Arabized as Arak, or Iraq. Similarly, the First World War, the condemnation of Great Britain and France over Syria resulted in the partition of the country according to their political aims and interests and gave rise to the political designations Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Sicilia, and Iraq. Natural Syria consists of all these regions, which constitute one geographical, economic, strategic unit. The Syrian social nationalist cause will not be fulfilled unless the unity of Syria is achieved. The partitioning of Syria between Byzantiums and the Persians in the eastern and western Syria, and the creation of barriers between them regarded considerably for a long period in the national growth and development of the social and economic life of the country. This division resulted in also destroying the truth about the borders of Syria. Additional factors contributing to distortion were the incursion of the desert in the lower arch of the Fertile Crescent, the decrease in the population and recession of urban areas by virtue of constant wars and invasions, the deforestation which made all the vast areas of the country desolate, the lack of reliable studies pertaining to the cause of this ever-increasing drought, which has caused deepening of the arch, has contributed that the expansion of the desert has been a permanent phenomenon. In my studies, I have demonstrated the indisputable unity of the country and examined the arbitrary grounds for its present condition. In its partitioning, established all the territories to the mountain term Mesopotamia refers. As far as the Zagros Mountains, that from the natural boundary separating eastern Syria from Iran falls within Syria. The Syrian homeland is a central factor in Syrian nationalism. Every Syrian social nationalist must be conversant with the boundaries of his beautiful country and to keep it an image of his mind. In order to safeguard the rights of his descendants in this wonderful country, he should grasp the well of the unity of his nation, the community of its rights, and the indivisible unity of its country. I have indicated in Book 1 of The Emergence of Nations that the dynamism and the vitality of a nation led to adjustments of its borders. And a strong, ever-growing nation will transcend its frontiers and expand beyond them, whereas a weak and withering nation will shrink within its frontiers. After the decline and fall of great Syrian states, the Syrian nation was receded to impotence and recession. It lost the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, and Sicilia to Turkey. It shrank within its own natural boundaries and was finally broken up by the powers which invaded and occupied its territory, in whole or in part. The Syrian Social Nationalist Party symbolizes the resurgence of the Syrian nation, which is determined on recovering its power and vitality and reclaiming its dismembered parts. The sixth basic principle. The Syrian nation is one society. On this fundamental principle are based some of the reform principles to be expounded later, such as the separation of religion and state and the elimination of social barriers between various sects and creeds. This principle is the basis of general national unity, the mark of national consciousness, and the guarantee of the life and endurance of the Syrian character. One nation, one society. The unity of society is the basis of the community of interest and consequently the basis of the community life. The absence of social unity entails the absence of common interests, and no resort to temporary expediency can make up for this loss. Through social unity, the conflict of loyalties and negative attitudes will disappear, to be replaced by a single national unity, ensuring the revival of the nation. Similarly, all religious bigotries and their nefarious consequences will cease, and their national collaboration and toleration will prevail. Moreover, the economic cooperation and the sense of national concord will unify and be fulfilled. The pretext for foreign intervention will be abolished. Real independence and real sovereignty will not be fulfilled and will not endure unless we rest upon a general social unity that is a sound basis for the national state and the social nationalist civil legislation. This unity forms the basis for citizenship and the guarantee of the equal rights of all citizens. The seventh basic principle. The Syrian social nationalist movement derives its inspiration from the towns of the Syrian nation and its cultural, political, national history. This principle asserts the spiritual independence of the nation in which its national character, ideals, and aims are grounded. The party believes that no Syrian can be affected save through the agency of the inborn independent Syrian character. Indeed, one of the major factors absent of the Syrian national consciousness or its weakness is the overlooking of the general character of the Syrian nation, as manifest in the intellectual and practical contributions of its people and their cultural achievements, such as the enactment of the first civilized code of law and intervention, the alphabet, the greatest cultural, intellectual revolution in history, let alone the material spiritualization effects of Syrian colonization and the culture of the civilizing influence Syria exercised over the whole of the Mediterranean, and the immortal achievements of such Syrians as Zeno, Bar Shalibi, Saint John Chrysostom, Ephraim el-Mahdi, Dik el-Ajin of Emesa, and el-Karibi, Gibran, and other great figures of ancient and modern times. To this list to be added the names of Syria's great generals from Sargon the Great to Esdradan, Senechaibi, and others. We derive our ideals from other character, and we declare in the Syrian character in all Latin, science, philosophy, and other world, unless the Syrian ethnos is strengthened, and unless it is freed from dominating alien influences, the elements of real independence will be wanting, and Syria will fall short of its ideals. The eighth and final basic principle. Syria's interest supersedes every other interest. This is the most important principle in the national action, for in the first place, it provides the clue to sincerity and integrity of national militants. In the second place, it directs their energies towards the real purpose of national action, which is the interest of the Syrian nation and its welfare. Its criterion by which all national movements and actions are judged. Through this criterion, the SSNP excels all other political factions in Syria, to say nothing of its oblivious excellence in other respects. The SSNP aims at serving the concrete and tangible interests of Syrians and meeting their common needs and aims. There is no longer a need to seek in vain the definition of a national endeavor in the domain of the abstraction and impractical. This principle centers all principles around the interests of the nation, so that Syrians are no longer misled by the propaganda of those who would serve contrary interests. The life of the nation is a concrete reality, and so are its interests. The success of SSNP in bringing about this remarkable nation revival in our country is due, in great measure, to the fact that the party seeks the genuine interests of the Syrian nation and assert its will to life. Syria embodies our social character, facilities, ideals, our outlook on life and the universe. It is a symbol of our honor, dignity, and destiny. This is why our loyal to Syria